My name's Colin Marshall. This is the Marketplace of Ideas. This week, a conversation about using incentives, eating ethnic food, and becoming a cultural billionaire with Tyler Cowen, professor of economics at George Mason University and founder of the blog Marginal Revolution.
I'm absolutely an optimist. I think reading has never been healthier. Some of it's moved to the web, so it's harder for some people to make money, but readers are much better off, and I think people are smarter and better informed than they ever have been in the past. What is at your fingertips today is unprecedented. Most of it is quite close to being literally free. You know, I think big government is here to stay, maybe for some good reasons, maybe for some bad reasons. But it's a fantasy to think it's ever going to go away. And, you know, we need to deal with that and come up with creative ways of maximizing human freedom, given that the world is highly imperfect. And we shouldn't have some rigid ideology that's trying to answer all questions at the same time. That's not going to work either. Now, I still think a lot of solutions lie in a libertarian direction. But if people think we're going to somehow turn back the clock and return to 1890, it's just not in the cards, I think. We need to move on and focus on some other ideas.
Listen to any Marketplace of Ideas interview anytime on our online archive on the website colinmarshallradio.com or download them from iTunes. Open up iTunes and search for the Marketplace of Ideas. And there you can also subscribe and get it every single week automatically. If you listen to the show, why not add yourself to our international listening community on our Frapper map, available on our website, colinmarshallradio.com. My guest is Tyler Cowen, professor of economics at George Mason University and founder of the blog Marginal Revolution. His new book is Discover Your Inner Economist, Use Incentives to Fall in Love, Survive Your Next Meeting, and Motivate Your Dentist. Tyler Cowen, welcome to the Marketplace of Ideas.
Thank you for having me on.
Now, just want to start this off a little bit broad. Who is the inner economist?
Yeah, the inner economist is the part inside you that lives by economic principles every day. So when you go to the supermarket or when you make decisions, you're calling upon your inner economist. So we all act like economists all the time. What I'm trying to do is to get people to be more aware of how they're making economic choices, and so they can make better choices and improve what they're doing.
And this is what I would call a book in the tradition of economics and everyday life, which I would say goes back to Stephen Landsberg with The Armchair Economist. Where does your book fit on that map, with Freakonomics now being a big release, a couple of years back and all that? There's been a trend, and where does your book fit?
Well, my book is part of that trend, but I think of it as being quite different from the others. Sometimes I call my book Economics for Emotional People. So I very much promote the idea that we're not always rational, we're not always perfect calculators, that pride and self-deception, our desire to impress others, are what rule human behavior, and not just dollars and cents. So it's a very different view of economics. It draws more on psychology in many ways.
What's a situation that showcases that point of view? Where do you most differ from a standard just use markets sort of economist?
Well, just to give you an example, one way in which I started to write this book is my wife and I one day tried an experiment to get our daughter to do the dishes. She wasn't doing them very often. This was when she was 14. And we thought we had the clever idea we would pay her money to do the dishes. This was my wife's idea, actually. Now, a normal economist would predict if you pay your daughter money to do the dishes, she'll do the dishes all the time. But in fact, what happened is she didn't do the dishes at all. She stopped doing them altogether. So from her point of view, it felt like her parents were trying to control her. And if we would pay her to do the dishes, we could pay her to go to some college or drop her boyfriend or whatever. And no way did she want to step into that kind of relationship. So that's an example where a better understanding of psychology shows there's more to it than maybe a normal economist would see at first.
Is that to do mainly with the family setting, in that money just doesn't work as well as an incentive within families?
Well, it is families, but I think a key point is that it's not just families. When you look at people at the workplace, they're also motivated by loyalty, by pride, by stubbornness, by fear of control. All those same emotions pop up in all different parts of our lives.
When money doesn't work as an incentive, what are some of the things that do?
I think sometimes just having a high moral standing and just asking people in a polite way and expecting a certain kind of respect, I think. Those don't always work, but they're a start. And then, of course, there are just times where it's money that matters. If you want bananas from your supermarket, it doesn't matter what you say unless you fork over the cash. You're a shoplifter, right?
That's true. So is it better in the professional sphere to use money as your incentive? You don't want to get into the territory of respect, or do you?
You don't. Respect is most important when you have repeat dealings and when it's not totally anonymous. But when it's you, a cashier, and a security guard, it really does usually boil down to paying up the money, and you'd better do it.
And these areas of your title, falling in love, surviving your next meeting, and motivating your dentist, what incentives do you use in those areas? Are they a combination of money and other, or just mostly other, or mostly money, or?
Well, in those areas, I think often the first place to start is to be aware of your self-deceptions. So I view human beings as tricking themselves all the time. We tell ourselves stories that aren't true or we don't really mean. So, for instance, if it's falling in love, a lot of people, they tend to think they know what they want a lot more than they really do. So they'll rule out all sorts of potential partners because they don't fit some script or they don't meet some very exact description. So just clearing away your fallacies, I think, often accounts for more than half the gains you're able to reap.
Is this always something that we should do? We should always look for where we're deceiving ourselves and always root that out?
Not always. We should deceive ourselves less. But if we didn't deceive ourselves at all, we'd actually be pretty depressed. If we didn't deceive ourselves at all, we'd spend too much time thinking about our impending death and the possible destruction of the world and so on. So to get through a day, you need a pretty upbeat outlook, which is maybe often justified, but not always. So like in the big picture level, you should maybe be more optimistic than you ought to be. But when it comes to the details, you need to look a little harder and ask some self-critical questions and take it seriously.
What's an area where you yourself have managed to cut down on the self-deception?
Well, maybe I self-deceive about where I've cut back on the self-deception.
Meta self-deception, oh boy.
But I like to think when it comes to my own weaknesses, say as a writer or just as getting along with people, like if I'm arguing with my wife, I'll try to stop in the middle of the argument and just say to myself, hey, Tyler, there's a 50% chance that you're wrong. Now, I don't manage to tell myself that all the time. Sometimes the argument just runs on. But I think about half the time I manage to get that message across to myself. Hey, Tyler, half the time you're wrong. It's good to keep in mind next time you have an argument.
Is that actually the number half the time, or is that just a figure you use in your head?
It's just a figure. I'd say it's a minimum.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I'm quite unreasonable and I'm wrong 80% of the time. But just as like a first cut, as an average, we can't all be right all the time when we disagree. And on average, disagreeing people are wrong half the time. So take that as like a first cut. Hey, I'm wrong half the time, maybe more.
In the world of economics, is this idea of self-deception and the idea of non-monetary incentives, how widespread are those? Is this a very maverick thing you're doing?
It's not widespread. It's starting, however. I'm not the only person talking about these ideas, but we're definitely in a minority. And most economists fall into the simpler view, money, trade markets, pay to get it done.
What caused this change toward a little wider view than simply money and markets?
Well, in my case, I think it really has been introspection and the course my life has taken, like this example of trying to get our daughter to do the dishes. I think, in the bigger picture, people see that standard economics doesn't have all the answers. They know at some gut level life just isn't about money. And I think that's why these ideas are making progress.
This sounds to me like a little bit of a breakdown in the boundary between economics and psychology. What would you like to see happen between those sciences?
Well, I think the boundary should become much looser, also with sociology. And maybe in the long run, people should get PhDs in social science rather than in some very particular field. Because the people now working on the frontier, they use economics, psychology, and sociology, and history. You have to know something about all of those.
Is it just those main four, or can any discipline bring something to someone studying economics?
Well, I think most of the social sciences are important. Anthropology is important. If you go spend some time, in a rural village in Mexico, you'll learn an awful lot very quickly. I think every economist should have to do something like that. So most of the major social sciences, I think, are undervalued by people in the other social sciences.
So given all that, what drew you to economics initially?
When I was very young, I decided I wanted to be a professor and thought I would either be a philosopher or an economist. But then I learned it was very hard to get a good job as a philosopher, but that almost all economists got good jobs. And I thought, well, I should be an economist, and I can always do a philosophical version of economics. And when I was around 14, that's what I thought, and that's the way it's been.
And you're known for your wide range of views, sort of a polymathic range of interests. And was that a factor as far as choosing economics? Did you know that economics would allow you to pursue your wide variety of interests?
Well, I didn't really. At the time when I started, economics was a lot less broad than it is today. So it was, a penalty for a long time. And I think economics has come around to the point where my background has become an advantage. But the early part of my career, it didn't help me at all.
Was that a time when a book like Discover Your Inner Economist could not be published? There was just less of an interest in widening economics at that time?
Yes, absolutely. So the world's improved quite a bit in this way.
Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about your blog, Marginal Revolution, and what got you into the conversation that is the blogosphere. What drew you to that?
About 4 years ago, I was thinking that blogs would become huge, and there weren't many good economics blogs, and maybe there weren't any back then. And I thought, if I started blogging, this would be a way to get in on the ground floor. And blogging rewards knowing a lot about many different things, because you can't say the same thing over and over again. Your readers get bored. So I thought, hey, I should be doing this. And I haven't stopped.
What is the goal of Marginal Revolution? Is it the same since day one?
My goal mostly has been that I learn things myself and that blogging keeps me sharp and I interact with readers and get to know interesting things. And that stayed the same. But I'd say who we've written it for has changed. When we started, my co-blogger and I never really understood that so many people in the media would read it. And we've become a kind of source where people in the media go to us first for leads or analysis or commentary. And we've become more of that than we thought we would be. That's been the main change.
You talk about what doing the blog has brought you. I mean, it's as you said, given you a way to keep you sharp. What do you think is the appeal that's made it so popular? Because you're always high on the ranks of economics blogs.
I think people like to connect with other people and to read the same commentator every day and know that person is always there. There's a sense of warmth, there's a sense of connection, but also you get to know, when can you trust them, where do you agree, where do you disagree. You can gauge or benchmark that person's opinions. And it's a lot more useful than like going to CNN and you get a very sort of vague, impersonal news report. You're never quite sure what to make of it. I think that's why blogs are so popular. It's that personal connection.
That's an appeal of blogs in general, but what about specifically Marginal Revolution? What's so appealing about it? Because I've been reading it for a long time. I find it very appealing. I have a hard time articulating why, maybe because of the variety you bring to it, but what do you think?
We try to keep it always surprising, which is hard to do, but I think we succeed more than do most blogs. We try to keep a very tolerant tone, and we always are admitting, we might be wrong, or here's what we're sure about, here's what we're not so sure about. So I think it's a very humane vision of knowledge that we're trying to communicate, and that's more important than any concrete argument we're trying to make on any given day.
What has blogging brought to the way you write books, and specifically Discover Your Inner Economist? How has blogging affected this new book?
Well, a lot of the ideas were first tried out on the blog, so you put an idea out, you see how readers react. And sometimes readers just stomp on your idea and you say, I guess that's not right, forget that. And that doesn't make it into the book. But other things, have longer legs and you think about them more, and so it's a kind of test drive for ideas.
Are all the ideas in Discover Your Inner Economist, are they blog-tested, blog-approved?
Oh, no, maybe half the book is from the blog, but the other half isn't. But even the ideas that aren't blog-tested, you just get a better sense of what people will buy into and what they won't. People have a lot of common sense, and if you can't convince anyone else as inner economist, maybe your theory is wrong.
How has the blog worked as a promotional tool for this book, to the extent that you've promoted the book with it? I know you had there was a period where people could get free copies. How has that helped you out with promotion?
I believe a large number of blog readers have bought the book. I don't actually have a way of proving that. People email me and say they did in great numbers. So, marketing is hard to trace. But if your name is out there every day and people read you, I think it has a positive effect.
For big blog readers, what could their inner economist do for them? How do you read blogs in an inner economist approved way?
I think find 3 or 4 blogs you really like and stick with them. And that's more useful than always jumping around to a different blog every day. So get to know the blog writer and learn how that person's mind works. And learning how another mind works, I think, is ultimately more interesting than learning, part of a technical field, because ultimately humans care about humans. 3
or 4 blogs. Do you personally read that few? Just 3 or 4?
I don't know. I read many more, but for most people who put less time into blogging than I do, then maybe they don't have time to read 10 blogs a day. I don't read that many a day. Maybe I'll read a dozen, which is a lot, but I know people who read 200 a day. But if you have, room in your life for 3 or 4, I'd say that's a good start, and if you want to expand it, do so. But get to know a few of them well before you go crazy and, start reading 200 at the same time.
In the book, you describe a number of reading methods that would be suggested by the inner economist, and they're not reading methods that someone's middle school English teacher would approve, but what sort of techniques do you recommend?
Well, the first thing I tell to people is to be very willing to quit reading the book you're reading, feel no obligation to finish, that we're programmed to feel obligations to be loyal to people and family, and that's exactly how it should be. But the same logic doesn't actually extend to books. So we treat books like family when we should treat them as, disembodied paper and book covers. So if the book doesn't interest you, just put it down. Don't give it, more than 50 pages. If you don't like the first 50 pages, you're probably not going to like it. Move on. You're missing out on truly wonderful other books. So keep in mind your opportunity cost when you're reading.
Do you recommend that same method with all forms of culture? If it's not happening for you, just drop it as soon as you can to minimize your cost?
People should walk out of many more movies than they do. Go with the plan that you're willing to walk out and have in mind what else you could be doing.
How many movies do you walk out on? How many books do you put down as a rough percentage? What do you finish versus what you start?
It depends on the time in my life, but I'd say typically I put down 5 books for every book I finish. Movies, I walk out maybe of a third of them. But keep in mind, if you're willing to walk out, you're going to sample a lot more. So a new movie comes out, I'm not sure it's good. I say, what the heck, let's give it a try. If I'm gone in 10 minutes, what did I really lose? Go to the next theater, see something else.
Out of pure curiosity, what's the last film that you walked out of?
It was a movie called The Savages.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
I saw Friday. I walked out after the first 5 minutes, and I walked into Juno, and I went to see The Savages thinking, unless this is great, I'd rather see Juno, so I'm just going to bolt. And in 5 minutes, I was gone. So
you had a backup in mind, and you were mentally ready to go to that backup if The Savages faltered at all. That sounded like it did.
Absolutely. And, The Savages, it wasn't bad. I just said to myself, hey, this isn't as good as Juno. I gave it a chance, but I'm going to go see Juno tonight, and I was gone. So what made you go to The Savages first, then? Just to test the water? Test the water. I figure there's some chance, like 1 in 10, this movie's great. Some reviews were very good, some less so. Like, who knows? I thought, let's try it. It could be a good movie, and I'll still leave. I can't see every good movie, but if it's great, I want to know, and I tried it. After those 5 minutes, your inner economist said, you got to walk out. Yeah, it said, this movie seems well done, but it doesn't interest me that much. To me, it's not special. I can see that people like it, but I'm going to go see Juno. And people often comment, at least to me when I talk to people about your blog, about the sheer volume of books you read. And when you do the same thing with the books, when your inner economist judges them, how far do you make it in before you typically put a book down, if you're going to put it down? Well, most books, I think within the first 3 or 4 pages. And maybe I read too far when I say read 50 pages. But maybe you just need to talk yourself into the fact that it's not going to get better. But even after a page or looking at the book in a bookstore, I think at least half the time right away. Do most books not get better? The books that you have read through to the end, is the quality curve does not come up? That's true for nonfiction. I think fiction is fundamentally different. if it's a great novel, especially a deep and subtle novel, you usually cannot tell on page one how good it will be. You really need to give it some time. But if you're reading a history book or economics, I say make a snap judgment. Occasionally you'll be wrong, but you'll get to sample, 5 or 10 times as many books as otherwise. And the ones you gain will make up for the ones you put down too quickly.
What's a recent book that your inner economist said no to, and what did you abandon it for?
There was this book out by Mark Penn called Microtrends.
Oh,
It's
yes.
a well-written book. It sold well. I mean, it's not bad. The guy's a smart guy, but I read it, and I thought, I know all this stuff. This is not really a deep and insightful book. Maybe if I read all 300 pages, I'll learn one thing, but, as it stands now, it's stalled. I put it down.
There's an area of culture that I wanted to be sure to touch on. It's something you write about often, and that is, of course, ethnic food. And first of all, I want to get an idea of what brought you to the enthusiasm that you have for ethnic food. How did you get to where you are? I mean, you have your own ethnic food guide, for example.
My love for ethnic food came from the year when I moved to Germany in my early 20s. And German food's very good, but I got sick of just eating German food, so I started trying everything over there. And then I came back, and there's been no turning back. So like our family, we will eat like Indian or Chinese or Mexican food either out or at home. And we hardly eat American food anymore, ever. The other stuff, I think it's better, it's cheaper. If you eat the right stuff, it's better for you. So, why not? The mere fact that my ancestors ate American food, why should I care?
That's very understandable. American food isn't one of my favorite food genres either. I wonder, do any other countries make especially good American food, or have you just not tried that?
Well, Canada makes better American food than America.
Really?
I think just like normal cuisine in Canada is much better than here. And until the recent collapse of the dollar, it was a lot cheaper.
What do you chalk that up to, the quality of American food in Canada?
I think some of its ingredients. I think Canada, it's more urbanized. There's a higher percentage of the population living in cities. And so people there, on average, have better taste in food. I think those are the main reasons.
Coming back to the book, we'll give you a taste of a taste, as it were, of the ways that an inner economist might guide you to good ethnic food.
Well, one simple rule of thumb, if you're in like a strange city, don't expect really good food, ethnic or otherwise, on the main thoroughfare. The main roads and the shopping malls, you'll get places like Thank God It's Fridays or Hard Rock Cafe, and they're at best okay. But the best places tend to be a little bit out of the way or a little bit hard to find because locals go, people who are committed to food go to them. So what makes me excited is when I hear a place is hard to find, I think, wow, I want to go there. Don't be scared off. When you hear it's hard to find, track it down. It's a very good rule of thumb.
Would you say, and this is just off the top of my head, that a restaurant with a lot of factors going against it might be a good one if it's been around for a while? For example, a lot of competition, out-of-the-way location, maybe a seedy area?
Those are all great signs, yeah. Family-owned is a good sign. If it doesn't advertise, if it doesn't have any website, if it's something, odd that you wouldn't think maybe should work, then try it, because it's there for a reason. Someone must be spending their money there for some reason.
And the dishes on the menu, looking at the menu, how might the inner economist help you there to choose?
It depends what kind of restaurant you're at. If you're at like a fine dining establishment, the best thing to do usually is to defer to the judgment of the waiter and just ask the waiter what is best. Don't ask what is popular. Ask what is best. And don't let him tell you, well, it depends, whatever. Just like, what's best? You should know. But if you're at an ethnic restaurant, look at the people of that nationality or ethnicity and see what they're eating, and just point and order that. Get out of your comfort zone. Don't keep on ordering the roast chicken. Roast chicken's good. It's always good. It's even good at home, but, who needs another roast chicken?
One of my favorite strategies that you mentioned in the book is to order the item that sounds the most unappetizing. And how often do you do that yourself? Just go in and you pick the worst looking thing on the menu?
Well, I used to do that all the time, but, my own tastes have evolved so much that to me it all sounds appetizing now. It used to be I'd go to a restaurant, I'd see like sweetbreads, I'd think, that sounds gross, and I'd order it and it would be great. Now I'm at the point where I see the roast chicken and I think, that sounds gross, and I'm not sure what to do anymore. For people with normal intuitions, get the thing that sounds strange. It's on the menu for a reason. It probably tastes better. Were
the bad-sounding dishes always good, or did you occasionally kind of get burned by them?
If you go to a good restaurant, they're pretty much always good. I don't recommend going to your local Burger King or diner and ordering that which sounds the worst. It's going to be horrible. But using this in a good restaurant, it pretty much always works.
What's your favorite food ethnicity?
I love Sichuan and Mexican. It's hard to get good Mexican food in this country.
And why those?
I like spicy, I like stews, I like combinations of a lot of ingredients. I like Indian food quite a bit.
What's keeping good Mexican from the United States?
Meats and cheeses are the main problems. The rest is pretty easy to reproduce, but especially pork is much better in Mexico. It's all free range and it's much fresher. And their cheeses are gooier, fattier, and more delicious. And American consumers like blander tastes, and in Mexico it's spicier. Put that all together, it's much better there.
I've got to get down to Mexico and try some of that food. The way that you write about it, that has sold me on it more than anything, the way you talk about it on the blog.
Oh, it's absolutely delicious.
Now, moving on to some other areas of culture, you cover so many in here, and I want to get a good flavor of this for the audience. For example, going to museums, how does the Inner Economist deal with that experience for not experienced museum goers?
Well, I think most people, when they go to museums, they feel overwhelmed. There are just thousands or even millions of items to see. They don't know where to start. They don't know where to end. And the key enemy in this process is yourself. So what you've got to do is keep yourself interested. Admit you have a limited attention span and make the experience like more about you. So I recommend, go to each room and just ask yourself, like, if I could steal one painting in this room, which one would it be? Make it into a kind of silly game. And I find when people do that, when I do that, you just pay a lot more attention. You're somehow personalizing the art. Otherwise, you end up back in being overwhelmed.
And this is what you call the me factor, and if I'm understanding this right, let me know, but it's bringing yourself into the equation in order to narrow down the noise of what you're experiencing. You look for what relates to you?
That's absolutely right, the me factor.
Do you bring that to all areas of culture, or is that more of a museum thing, or can the me factor come in anywhere?
No, I think it's everything. It's music, too. Most people, they love the music they grew up with or fell in love to or danced to at the high school prom. And after age 30, like their musical taste stops evolving. That's because of the me factor. So most of our tastes in culture, we pretend it's about culture, but it's mostly about ourselves, whether we like it or not.
Like you've observed, I've found that so many people, and sometimes myself included, have a hard time widening their musical taste. And what's your strategy to always keeping a good churn of music coming through your listening experiences in life?
Obviously, there's way more great music out there than any person can ever listen to. The key is to be interested. And the usual advice to get yourself interested is like educate yourself. But I don't think that's really a fun way of achieving the end. I would say start by admitting to yourself that you're like weak and you don't really care about most culture. And just accept that and then try to open yourself up just a bit. Start by admitting your own fallibility and make some progress from that point on.
Is that what you started doing? You admitted that, and then you found yourself immersed in an impressively wide variety of culture in a certain time span after that?
Yes, I think people who just take the straight educational route, they just end up more overwhelmed. Like, here's the complete works of Bach and Mozart, and they see it on the shelf, my goodness, 87 CDs for Beethoven, and they don't get through it. It needs to be broken down and made simpler and more craven in a way. That's how we get to know more great music.
What I'm hearing here is that people come at culture too often with a bit of an educational mindset, but I mean educational as in like coming at it like a school reading assignment, like something they have to grind through, and you'd like them to stop that and just go for what appeals to them.
That's right. Treat it more like TV. Who would watch a TV show like a sitcom or a drama for like purely educational purposes? You do it because you enjoy it or you don't. Make it more like that.
If you're just tuning in, my guest is Tyler Cowen, professor of economics at George Mason University and founder of the blog Marginal Revolution. Tell me if this is something that makes sense to you, but it's often something that I've thought about. It's that in culture, you got to go for what immediately appeals to you, and you can jump from that as if it were part of an archipelago to other parts of culture. As long as you get a foothold on something, you can move from one island of culture to the next, as long as you just kind of keep moving.
That's exactly right. Without that foothold, you will fail. But once you've made it to Beethoven, you'll get to Brahms. Then it means something to you. You have like a language to feel it in, experience it in, talk about it in.
Considering your exposure, your wide exposure to a huge variety of music, what artists would you recommend that are just unknown, that people will have a very low chance of stumbling upon themselves? What would you urge someone to seek out?
Well, I like a lot in African pop. So, this group Amadou and Miriam, the two blind singers, their husband and wife, I think they're great, and hardly anyone knows them. I think they're making better pop music than anything in Top 40. So I tell people to start there, and it's very accessible. I mean, you'll like it the first time you hear it.
What does African pop do differently as a genre than, say, American pop or really any Western world pop?
It's somewhat more rhythmic. It's less slick. I think it's a bit more authentic. It's still, of course, commercial. These people do it to make money. But it's a feel that's different, and it's easier to be surprised if you come to it with Western ears. Whereas Top 40, it's very, very hard to be surprised by it these days. This is not 1962 with Buddy Holly. It's like we've heard all the tricks by now.
As far as other areas of culture, for example, say with novels, what should people be reading, or who should people be reading that they just aren't?
This depends more on taste. Like music is more of a universal thing, whereas what a person likes in novels depends on your personality more. I like this fellow, Roberto Bolaño, the Chilean author, who died a few years ago. I think his book, The Savage Detectives, is as good as the best of Garcia Marquez. I'm not sure it's for everyone. It requires a lot of attention. It's a long book. But if you're looking to be ambitious, I would say read The Savage Detectives by Roberto Bolaño.
Are you yourself a big fan of fiction from that region of the world? Because it has its, of course, unique feel to it.
Absolutely. Again, it's something that surprises me. It brings me to different worlds. A lot of American fiction, I feel it's very well written. Like I read this book by Claire Messud. I think it's called The Emperor's Children.
Oh, I've read that, yes.
I thought, this is a good book, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I felt like, I've lived with this for 20 years. Like I know it as well as she does. Maybe if I were from Romania, I'd love this book. But I finished it, I was like, But whereas I read Bolaño about, Mexico, Latin America, it brings this whole new world to life. To me, that's more exciting.
You're a very surprise-oriented consumer of culture, are you not?
I like to be surprised, yeah. Something new.
I have conversations with friends about this, and they tell me that they'll start listening or reading something, and they'll be turned off because it's something that they're unfamiliar with. But I find myself increasingly being attracted only to what I'm unfamiliar with. Is that what you talk about in Discover Your Inner Economist? You'll find yourself moving toward what you are not familiar with?
Absolutely. And for me, in the last few years, that's actually been a fair amount of TV. Because I grew up thinking TV was a cesspool. Mostly it was. But there's some pretty good shows, and it's not just that they're good. I'm used to novels. I turn on the TV, I see something good, I'm stunned. And that's my new revelation, really, is television.
What do you think is causing that? All these shows that are much more, I don't know about detailed, but involved shows that require more thinking on the part of the viewer. What's bringing that into fashion?
I think the decline of the networks and the rise of cable. You can get by with a smaller audience.
And this is where I'm going to ask you to keep your economist hat firmly on. Competition, is that the key here?
Absolutely. How many channels do you have? On my box, I can't even count how many. So what they put on, it has to be good. It has to take some chance. If you have 500 channels, you don't get anywhere by aiming for the middle. You've got to do something different.
And a stark contrast to when there were 3 channels, and you got a lot of brain-dead sitcoms, as I understand it.
Yeah, you had a few good shows, like early I Love Lucy's funny, but for the most part, it was worthless. And today, it's like the theater in the 18th century or in Elizabethan times. It's way more important than movies today. TV shows are what people talk about. In the 70s, people talked about movies.
In the book, you call the strategy of bringing your inner economist to culture as a way to become a cultural billionaire. Are most people culturally poor, in your opinion?
An awful lot of people are culturally poor. But if you ask me this, would you rather have $1 billion and not really know how to enjoy culture, or rather have like a normal salary and get culture? You're richer with a normal salary, knowing how to get culture. That's what I mean when I say you can be a cultural billionaire.
Without having the cultural skill, you can't really do much at all with $1 billion, can you? You can use it to maintain yourself biologically, but that seems to be about it.
A billionaire can buy a Picasso, and I can't. But if I enjoy walking through the museum more, and music is cheap, and books are free at the library, and TV is close to free, and the web, I'm much richer than the billionaire, basically.
Do you spend a lot of time at the library, or are you mostly a book buyer?
Both. I tend to obsess over books. I'd say I visit my public library maybe 4 or 5 times a week, and I go to Borders twice a week. I go every Tuesday to check out the new books. After we're done chatting, I'll be driving to Borders and seeing what's out today.
I'll be doing that, too, a little later in the day. Is there anything you're looking forward to this week that you know is going to come out?
There's a new Tim Harford book on economics called The Logic of Life. I've already read it. It's a great book, but I'm not going to buy it because they sent me a review copy. But I just like to see it on the table, see the cover, read the blurbs. We'll see what else is out. But, the Christmas season's over and new releases are starting to come again.
Yeah, I too love going to the table and seeing all the new books spread out, just there for the browsing or buying or whatever. But with the Harford book, The Logic of Life, now that's going to be a feature on Marginal Revolution's book forum. And what's that operation? What have you got going on there?
Every now and then we do a book forum where I tell all the readers to buy and read this book. And I go through it chapter by chapter and tell them what I think. And it's a great way to learn a book, is to see how one person would agree, disagree, dissect the book, view it as a whole, evaluate the arguments. Last time we did it with Greg Clark's book, people thought it was a great experience. So we're going to do it again.
I talk to a lot of book people on this show, and some are a little bit pessimistic about the state of books, the state of reading, the state of publishing. Would you call yourself an optimist in that regard?
I'm absolutely an optimist. I think reading has never been healthier. Some of it's moved to the web, so it's harder for some people to make money. But readers are much better off, and I think people are smarter and better informed than they ever have been in the past.
Is this the best time for not just reading, but culture in general?
Absolutely. What is at your fingertips today is unprecedented, and most of it is quite close to being literally free.
Since 2007 just wrapped up, I wanted to talk a little bit about the cultural events of 2007 through Economist eyes. You just posted about this recently, but what were some of your favorite cultural events of 2007, or your favorite, whatever you'd like to name?
Well, I thought the huge event of the year was the iPhone. I know it's gotten a lot of publicity, but I think it's still under-publicized relative to what's been done. And what's really happened is that now you can carry around in your pocket this tiny little personal computer that can do almost anything you want it to do. And I don't even use it as a phone. I use it to read websites and read book reviews on Amazon, or read about my favorite musicians, and I, pop it out, turn it on, and there it is. The quality's amazing. It's very easy to use. It's completely consumer-friendly, and of course it plays music too.
I know the world made a big deal about the iPhone. Why didn't they make a bigger one? Because this is unlimited internet right there in your pocket. I mean, it seems like there should be more commotion.
I think some people are anti-Apple. I think also Apple made the business decision to market it as a cell phone. Maybe that was a good business decision, but it's really misled people as to what it is. It's not mostly a cell phone. The cell phone use is incidental. It's mostly a portable personal computer that has a web browser that's probably much better than the one on your laptop or your office desk.
Economically speaking, this iPhone, does it lower the opportunity cost of standing around waiting in line, doing inconvenient things that before you could maybe try to read, but you couldn't get much done? Has it cheapened, not cheapened, but made less expensive opportunity-wise a lot of life for you?
Waiting in line is now a pleasure.
Oh.
Because even if I'm waiting in line for 5 minutes, I pull out the iPhone, I read blogs for 5 minutes. It's what I would have done later at home anyway. It's great. It's a lot of fun. You can carry around Moby Dick, but you're waiting in line for 5 minutes. You're not going to get that far in Moby Dick. It doesn't really quite work as an experience to read it waiting in line. But to read a few blogs, it's perfect.
What's your economist's take on reading devices like the Sony Reader and the Kindle? What do you make of those?
I don't think we're there yet. I think we'll get there. I haven't bought a Kindle yet. From what I understand, it's good for reading books, but they charge too much for web access. And a slightly tweaked version of the Kindle, I think, could be huge. Give it 5 years.
I've been waiting for a lot of the new generations of these electronics. I figure they'll improve the iPhone even more, so I'm waiting for that, but the waiting is getting difficult, I've got to admit. Back to the cultural events of 2007. What did you consider overrated in 2007?
Well, I think Hollywood didn't have a great year. Now movies were quite good in general. I saw like Diving Bell and the Butterfly. It blew me away. I thought it was a phenomenal movie. But Hollywood movies in recent years have tended to be more predictable. There are too many spectacles, like Spider-Man 3. They spent a lot of money on it. There's nothing there. There's nothing to it. They didn't even try to make it good. So at the moment, I'm down on Hollywood and high on TV, high on the iPhone, high on blogs, basically.
Do you see the spectacle film becoming more of a presence in the future, or do you see it on the downhill slope?
Well, I think they're still making money as these world markets open up. Spider-Man plays everywhere, and it made a huge profit. But for me, I used to love spectacle films, but at this point I feel I've seen what they can do. I'm willing to be challenged. I'd like to see another good one, but just churning them out again and again doesn't interest me. So it's what we talked about, that surprise. For me right now, they're lacking that surprise. But when I saw Star Wars in 1977, it was like, wow, this is amazing. I want to feel that again about movies.
We've talked a lot about when you should listen to your inner economist. When should you not listen to your inner economist?
Well, I think moderation is always a good idea. So any advice that anyone gives you, be somewhat skeptical. Take it in moderation. But, still realize most people are mired in self-deception, and they can do a bit better than they do. And on average, we should listen to ourselves, our inner economists, more.
What would it do for the world if economic knowledge were more widespread, if people knew more about economics?
I think we'd have more intelligent voting. Candidates would be held accountable to a greater degree. We'd have better economic policy. We'd be wealthier, and more lives would be saved. It wouldn't, end all evil, but the world would be a better place.
What is most poorly understood about economics? What are the biggest misconceptions?
I think the core ideas are incentives, opportunity cost, and gains from trade. And I don't think any of those are especially well understood. Careful use of data. Like if politicians use numbers, hold them accountable and expect to be told the truth. We need a lot more of that.
Is this because it's not particularly focused upon, say, in school, or is there a lack of interest, or what do you chalk it up to?
Well, school's a problem, but the very nature of voting means that hundreds of millions of people are choosing at the same time, and no one person really affects the outcome, so no one person tries that hard. You get a small class of political elites who know a lot, and then most voters who vote on gut feeling, the looks of the candidate, something they heard on network news, and most elections are not really highly intelligent affairs.
Do you think that more economic knowledge is a solution here, or is there a better one?
I think just being more critical, this idea of accountability is important, because it's not just economics knowledge. Americans need to know more about the world, just more factual knowledge, to be more tolerant, to realize that other people's points of view can be as valid or more valid than our own. So some of it is, very simple points that are almost more moral or philosophical than a question of knowledge.
In the past few years, I would say in the past 5 or 6 years, economics has become much more popular. It's become, you might call it a hot subject to study, and of course yours is one of the books that has come out about economics in everyday life. What do you make of this trend? Is it going to be sustained, do you think? Or is economics on the rise in a linear fashion, or is this a bit of not flash in the pan, but a temporary trend?
I don't think it's temporary. I think when you view it on a global scale, there's just a lot more interest in trade and business and investment because the world is developing and growing. And, I think maybe in America it will be some waves up and down, back and forth. But you look at places like China and India, and there's no doubt those places are much, much more interested in economics. And, that's billions of people right there, and I think it's very much permanent.
Now, about blogs, why have economists taken so much to blogging like the proverbial ducks to water?
I think you can make economics points pretty quickly. And if there's a data source, you link to it, and it's all there. If you're a philosopher and you have a long, convoluted argument, it's much harder to turn that into a short blog post. So blogging has favored the social sciences, which are based the most in fact, and that's economics.
Could every economist blog, or is that a subset of economists that are good for blogging and the rest should avoid it?
It's a subset. I'd say any economist could blog for a few weeks. But unless you are a generalist with wide interests, you'll run out of things to say. So those who stick with it tend to be the generalists.
Is that what you found with the guest blogging stints that there have been on Marginal Revolution? Some are better suited than others?
That's right. People do their own research. They know a lot about that. They can write about that for 2 weeks. But to blog every day, for 4 years, it's a very different endeavor. It requires very different skills. You have to be much more of an omnivore.
Politics is also a huge subject for blogging, and occasionally Marginal Revolution veers toward the political side, and you've been called a libertarian. Do you agree with that characterization?
I think I'm broadly libertarian, but I would say libertarian with a small L. And I don't think the answer lies in the Libertarian Party or Ron Paul. I think education and tolerance are more important than any specific set of political ideas.
You've been called a libertarian bargainer, which I take to mean someone with libertarian ideals who doesn't mind working within the existing public opinion and existing structures. Is that about right?
That sounds right. I think big government is here to stay, maybe for some good reasons, maybe for some bad reasons. But it's a fantasy to think it's ever going to go away. And, we need to deal with that and come up with creative ways of maximizing human freedom, given that the world is highly imperfect. And we shouldn't have some rigid ideology that's trying to answer all questions at the same time. That's not going to work either.
To refer to your post on, I believe, Cato Unbound, where you said that libertarians are going to have to accept growth in government. Big blowback there, as far as I saw. Do you still get a lot of flack about that from fellow libertarians?
All the time. They have not forgotten. Now, I still think a lot of solutions lie in a libertarian direction. But if people think we're going to somehow turn back the clock and return to 1890, it's just not in the cards, I think. We need to move on and focus on some other ideas.
And your immediate surroundings there at George Mason University, is it a libertarian department you have there?
I'd say about half of us are libertarian in the department. That's a pretty high percentage. But we have people with all kinds of viewpoints here.
And you have a number of blogging characters there. What about the George Mason environment is conducive to you talk about Robin Hanson in your book, these idiosyncratic thinkers, for lack of a better term?
We have a lot of generalists. We've tried to hire people who are very curious and very probing. And those are mentalities conducive to blogging. And then once a few of us did it, a number of others jumped on the bandwagon, and, we talk about our blogs to each other every day.
Is there anybody in the world, academia or any sphere, anybody that you would really like to see blog that isn't?
It's hard to know in advance, always, who will be a good blogger.
Oh, yeah, you don't know who's going to blog well until they do it.
That's right. No one really comes to mind. I like a lot of the bloggers we have already. Brad DeLong's great. Matt Yglesias is great. Gary Becker, who's maybe the greatest economist in the world. He blogs. He's good, but as a blogger, he's only good. He's not great. So it's hard to say.
You said you're an optimist about culture. Are you an optimist about the state of the world itself?
For most countries, I wouldn't say everywhere, but it's obvious China and India are doing much, much better. Europe's doing fine. U.S. maybe needs some patchwork, but it's still doing fine. Latin America's improving a bit slower than we'd like, but it's way better than it used to be. So mostly I'm an optimist.
You had a recent book review of Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine, not a particularly favorable review, and I take it that you're not particularly friendly to what I call scare punditry. Is that right?
That's right. She's not really a serious thinker. That book is all polemics. I don't agree with it, but even if I agreed with more of it, I wouldn't like it. It's not trying to give anyone a deeper understanding of the world's problems.
Is that sort of, I don't want to use the term again, but this scary punditry, this sort of flashlight under the chin, blaming the world's evils on various figures in one's own political cosmology. Do you see that as a threat to the world in general, or do you see it as kind of just, it's off to the side, it's just there, it's not affecting much of anything?
Oh, I think it's a huge threat. It's a kind of tribal mentality. Like us versus them, the us's are right. We're not going to listen. We have to demonize the thems. And ultimately, it threatens to erode democratic discourse and turn elections into screaming matches. So I'm very worried about that.
Is this something that's helped by, especially what the Internet's brought, the conversational aspect, like on blogs? You have responses to responses to responses. Is that a way to ameliorate this these sort of written-in-stone polemics that just kind of sit there?
Well, I hope it is, but I also worry because I see that the Internet mobilizes these polemics at the same time. So we try to fight that tendency. But in the battle, I'm not sure we're winning. Maybe the polemics are outracing the reasoned discourse. It's hard to say.
So the Internet may be, in your opinion, a perfectly double-edged sword in that regard.
That's right. I would like to be optimistic, but I'd say that the final answer still awaits us. We don't know.
Are there any areas that you can bring the Inner Economist to that you did not get to cover in the book? Anywhere else the Inner Economist has a lot to say that didn't make it in?
Well, I'm writing an entire book now on food. There's a chapter on food in the book, but most of my thoughts on food are not presented, like how to do things to help the environment or how to do things so that animals are treated more humanely. I'll cover those in the new book, but they're not even mentioned in the old, so I think there's a lot more to be covered.
The new book is entirely food-centric?
Yes.
Is it food through an economic lens? I don't know how much you can talk about the project, but it does sound intriguing.
It's food through an economic lens, and not just food, but also the environment.
And what brought you to that subject area? You've had an interest in food, but the environment, it's not one of the main subjects, though you do touch on it in the blog.
Well, I think we can all see the world has some serious environmental problems, and we shouldn't just do nothing. I'm not always optimistic about the ability of governments to solve those problems, so then there's the question, what can we do as people? We ought to do something, but we need to figure out what's going to work and what won't work.
As far as environmental problems, global warming, for example, I'm guessing is one that comes up there. How much do you agree with the mainstream, let's say, we have to sign the Kyoto Treaty sort of view? How much do you agree or disagree with that?
I think the mainstream view that it's a problem is correct, but I don't think anyone in the mainstream or outside of it has come up with a set of good solutions that we could actually implement. So in that sense, I don't agree.
Some call it the worst problem facing the world, the ultimate market failure. Do you agree?
I don't know if it's right to call it a market failure. I'd say, it's a failure of the human condition. It's a problem. But governments contribute to it, as much as markets do in a lot of ways. We have bad regulators and governments that pollute, and if we turn it into a left-wing versus right-wing, liberal versus conservative debate, we're going to make negative progress on it.
It's being turned, then, in the public sphere into a sort of debate that's not really what it is. It's becoming about ideology, you think, rather than looking at the data.
That's right. So there's this meme about rapacious capitalism. But the people who talk in those terms, they fly on jet airplanes to deliver talks in in Australia, whatever. Naomi Klein promotes her book, and it's very hypocritical that, no one's really talking about going back to a world where there are only a few million human beings in East Africa somewhere. So environmental change is here to stay. We can't turn back the clock. But at the same time, if we don't do anything, we're going to make a lot of people a lot worse off, and it seems to me there is a better solution out there somewhere.
That idea of rapacious capitalism been around for a long time. Do you think that the rise of India, the rise of China, the rise of very poor countries out of poverty will put a dent in that idea, in that meme of bad capitalism?
I think it's put a dent in it in those countries, but not among some of the more polemic Western left-wing intellectuals. I think like the successes, including Japan and Hong Kong, it's only made some of those people more irate and more polemic.
It doesn't help in America? No one learns from the successes?
Some people do, but, Naomi Klein's book has been a bestseller, as I'm sure you saw. So it's hard to say. But I know if you go to India or China, it's had a huge impact. People there say, hey, this is working.
I do wonder sometimes if a pundit who has taken the strong anti-capitalist line, capitalism is evil, Milton Friedman is the uber demon of capitalism, etc., I wonder if they believe it or if that just sells.
I think it sells, and then they end up talking themselves into believing it in a kind of self-deception.
Do you see that happening a lot? And I mean, this comes back to the idea of self-deception where a pundit perhaps takes a line, they get a good response, and then a feedback loop starts where they get reinforced in that idea because they get public approval and so on and so forth. Does that happen a lot, do you think?
That's exactly what happens, and that's what's happened with Naomi Klein's book.
An Inner Economist would help you avoid that, ideally, right?
That's right. I don't think Naomi Klein is sitting around cackling at how she's defrauding everyone. I'm pretty sure she believes what she says, but she doesn't use sufficiently honest intellectual thought processes to get there.
Has that sort of thing at all infiltrated the economics profession? Do you ever meet economists who have that same problem with fixed ideas?
Well, sure, and it's not just Naomi Klein. It's people on left wing and right wing. It really happens on both sides, probably to an equal extent, I would think. So I don't want to fixate on Naomi Klein because that's just one example out of many.
What do you hope for the economics profession?
I think it's gotten a lot better in the last 20 years. It's a lot more applied. People are more willing to look to other disciplines. So I'd say let's keep on moving in those directions. I worry a bit about over-specialization, that the body of knowledge now is so huge, it's hard for any one person to master any more than a small part of it. But I'm not sure how to correct that.
You think the generalist is in danger?
Blogging has helped the generalist. Generalist is making a comeback.
We'll still have generalists in the future. It's pretty safe, but the profession itself is dividing off into camps, you think?
Yes. Economics is fragmenting. People who know a small area very well and not that much else.
As that happens, though, the Internet's bringing more economists to the table, bringing more generalists to the table. Does that about balance out?
Yeah, the last 3 or 4 years have been great. But until then, the tendency was too many specialists.
The book is Discover Your Inner Economist. Tyler Cowen, thanks so much for taking the time to come on.
Thanks for having me.
Read Tyler Cowen's blog, Marginal Revolution, at marginalrevolution.com. Our music is composed by Ben Althouse. He also goes under the names Ice Ben and DJ Concept. Check out his website, www.benalthouse, that's BENALTHOUSE.com. For more information and our online show archive, visit colinmarshallradio.com.